started. Hi. I am Foglifter's editor-in-chief, Louisa Flynn Goodlett, and I just want to thank you for joining us to celebrate the culmination of this year's Bay Area Emerging Writer Fellowships with an intergenerational reading hosted by our inaugural fellows, Reggie Edmunds and Allie Cannon. Just a little background on the fellowships before we get started. Our yearly LGBTQ+ Bay Area Emerging Writer Fellowships are awarded to 2 extraordinary emerging writers, 1 transitional age youth, and 1 elder. With this fellowship, Foglifter hopes to foster intergenerational collaboration and artistic vision sharing across ages. We aim to strengthen the range of voices heard in the literary communities and to disseminate those new voices to the larger public. We also hope to up the balance of emerging LGBTQ writers by these emerging artists, mentorships, skills, and the publishing industry. You can learn more about the fellowships on our website, and we'll be accepting applications for new fellows this summer. Please be aware of this live caption for accessibility and is going to be recorded to be archived on YouTube, and we'll share that to our Facebook page as soon as that happens. So now please welcome your hosts for this evening of intergenerational literature and conversation, Reggie Edmunds and Allie Cannon.
Hello.
Go ahead, Reggie.
Hi, I am Reggie Edmunds. I am the Youth Emerging Writer Fellow with Foglifter, and I am very excited to present with Allie this amazing list of readers tonight. You are in for a treat. Allie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Allie Cannon, and Reggie and I will be introducing one another more in detail later, but I just want to say I'm really excited for this event and for all the authors that we have online with us here today, and just what a treat it's been to be in this fellowship together and with Foglifter staff. And I really hope that everyone who's part of this will enjoy the amazing LGBTQ+ work you're about to hear that spans generations and really expresses what a movement can look like.
Most definitely. So I guess we'll just jump right into it. I'm going to introduce the first reader. Willie Wilkinson is an award-winning writer.
Oh, that's me. Wait, I'm just interrupting you, Reggie, because so we don't get messed up off track. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, because otherwise then I would not know what I was doing. All right, so we're doing this as I invited all of the elder writers, and so we're switching off, introducing the folks we invited. So our first reader is Willie Wilkinson, and I'm going to read his bio and then also just say a few words on my own, because I've known Willie for quite some time now, and I'm really excited to be here on this event with him. So Willie Wilkinson is an award-winning writer, public health consultant, and cultural competency trainer. He's the author of the Lambda Literary Award-winning book, Born on the Edge of Race and Gender, A Voice for Cultural Competency. Willie is the recipient of a National Lesbian Gay Journalists Association Award and the Transgender Law Center Vanguard Award. And I just want to add that Willie and I have known each other for over 20 years. I'm proud to have been inspired by him when I was new to my own transition, when there was barely an ability to utter the word transgender in a public place. And we had to meet in really a secret, almost like a secret hideout south of Market in San Francisco, and just how far we've come to be able to know how many people are in our community as trans and gender non-binary folks. So it's a lot to think of that in one breath. And really proud to turn it over to Willie, who I think is both an amazing writer and an incredible voice in our generation.
Oops, I'm unmuted. Okay, thank you so much for that intro, Ali. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the invite. Proudly old ass holding up the this end, and that's the benefits of being old ass, is knowing people for decades. So thank you. And this is my show and tell item. Just me just trying to be a badass trans person here. But yeah, so this is my book, and I thought I would read a new piece, as well as a piece from my book. And you know, since it's Asian American Heritage Month, and since, you know, we're getting our asses kicked with all the anti-Asian sentiment, I thought, oh, I should read something about being Chinese. But then it occurred to me, you know, I wanted to do something that really was also another piece of the issues that are coming up around this this time that we're living in this time of pandemic. And so I thought I would read this new piece I wrote about medicine, as well as a piece from my book about the complexities and intersections of experience around mixed, trans, queer, and disability experience, as well as really looking at, you know, what it means to deal with disease that has been mocked, disregarded as inauthentic, and misunderstood. And with great gratitude for disability wisdom. And I also just really want to acknowledge that right now, as we speak, there's a memorial going on for Stacey Milburn Park, who was just an amazing API queer disability justice warrior that I was privileged to know, and so many other people have been impacted by her incredible work as someone who co-founded the Disability Justice Culture Club and really responded to the COVID crisis by organizing folks around workshops for community members to support folks, and mutual aid network that's really checking on elders and people with disabilities and providing resources and support. So I dedicate my reading to Stacey Park, who I'm so sorry that we lost this week. Okay, so anyway, let me go ahead and get started. So this is a piece I wrote just last week, right before the deadline to submit for closed captioning. But this one is inspired because a friend in my Chinese community, you know, was asking people about this idea of medicine. What does medicine mean to you? A curanderas once told me that I had the medicine. Medicine? I queried, curious, confused. The medicine of education, they said, gesturing with hands rising over face, like the curtain going up on opening night. Thank you for lifting the cement from our minds. Good to know, because sometimes I forget that I've been administering the medicine, training on queer and trans issues for a while now, 3 decades. But sometimes I forget that life, the before, a distant memory. My work evaporated into few opportunities to practice, replaced by public health uncertainty with a long lens on recovery. My focus now, as always, on the weight of finances, the worry of keeping my parents in their 90s safe as their patient care coordinator, who has helped them through 5 medical emergencies in the first 2 months of this year. In the before, 3 kids, playing with them, helping them with schoolwork, making sure they're having fun, happy, safe, and thriving. In these times of global pandemic, fear, devastation, and deep, unrelenting grief, medicine seems scarce for an incurable, deadly disease, the global health and economic crisis of our lifetime. But remember, there's medicine everywhere. It lives on in the playful sunshine, sweet taste of clean air, stinky smelling herbs, and a boiled brown potion soup stock and stew. The medicine lives on, not just in the freshly baked cookies oozing from the oven or the ice cream piled high with bananas and almonds, chocolate and peanut butter. It's the pure joy of togetherness, the gratitude for food in the fridge, community support, mutual aid, and reflection on what I have, not what I don't. The medicine is in and sharing food with loved ones, the gift of my special person and 3 vibrant kids, and the simplicity of a satisfying meal, fried rice, beef, and veggies that goes down easy when the news does not. The medicine is in the pure joy of swinging on a janky old swing set, swaying and rocking with each gleeful kick. Dirty little round toes and well-worn flip-flops, my kids grinning in stained, faded t-shirts, toothless amid squeals of delight. The medicine is in planting those tiny seeds, watering, weeding, tending, growing each tender green shoot. Peas, tomatoes, bok choy, little humans, our garden of hope. I found the medicine walking along the daily ebb of the beach, or immersion in that cold, delicious bay. The gentle caress or strong tide of wave curves and current. Bluster, the expanse of sand, where wet sand brings ease and predictability, and dry sand, the effort, the struggle, the push through textured, thick piles against a brisk wind and the blue, blue pink sky streaked white with cotton candy. I found the medicine in each determined step. All right, well, so now I'm supposed to see if the captioning is happening, but I can't see the captioning. So are we good with the captioning?
Yes, if at the bottom of your screen, should be a CC, and you should be able to go to view subtitles if you want to watch along.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so thank you. And I have this other piece that's, again, an excerpt from my book, Born on the Edge of Race and Gender, which really is a multi-genre book that is exploring the intersections around race, gender, disability, class, sexuality, and parenthood. Using the power of storytelling to articulate key issues of queer and trans movements, and using memoir as a cultural competency tool. And so this is a piece about my experience when I became very ill in 1992. And I think as we have these experiences of isolation, I think, we're drawing from and reflecting on and really feeling gratitude for disability wisdom that many people have experienced these things and, drawing from that disability wisdom now. And so I wanted to speak to what that experience is like, and also what my experience was having been sick at a time before we really had an intersectional disability movement that we now have, and rediscovering that in more recent years. So this is called the queering of CFIDs. I became a person who could not get out of bed. I studied the cracks in the ceiling, searching for clues, road maps, patterns. I wondered if I was dying. I had compartmentalized my life into race and gender and sexuality and point of view. And yet the real deal was nothing like that. I had been reduced to that basic human place, survival. I wanted nothing more than to get up in the morning, be able to make myself something to eat, and leave the house. But I couldn't. Leaving the house became a privilege that I no longer had on a regular basis. I got really skinny because I was too sick to properly feed myself. My lifestyle had become a long, slow, deadening road as I desperately tried to stay with the living. I knew I had to be an actor. It was a familiar role, navigating shifting reads on my race and gender. I thought I could be an actor in my diminished life, but have the satisfaction of knowing who I really was. Like straight cisgender people who played trans people, gliding to the stage to pick up their Academy Awards, glittering in gender normative attire, and sitting with opposite sex partners. I was an actor. I could pretend that I was living this life, that I wasn't really a dirtball collecting disability. I needed to remember that I was more than a fallen sibling or a dirty piece of toilet paper stuck on the bottom of some power-tripping Medi-Cal worker's shoe. But the gnawing hopelessness of what became years of disabling chronic illness and disability poverty got to me. After a while, I began to believe the version of every government agency or caseworker who policed me, that I was a no-good deadbeat who would never amount to anything. I became that person because I was that person, too sick to work, broke ass, worn down, nothing. I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, immune dysfunction syndrome, CFIDS, a epidemic proportion by persistent fatigue, debilitating symptoms that are not attributed to exertion, ameliorated by rest, or caused by other medical ailments. Shrouded in controversy, dismissed as psychiatric, CFIDS is steeped in social, political, and economic issues. Its legitimacy and existence dissed and resisted. When I got CFIDS, I became a full-fledged pariah, and I quickly discovered that CFIDS was as queer and trans and mixed heritage as I was. So this is a much longer piece. I'm jumping around, excerpting little bits, but I'm going to talk about rediscovering the disability, or what the disability justice movement had become years later, and connecting to that, where, you know, in the 90s, it didn't really have an intersectional lens, the independent living movement and the disability justice movement, in more recent years, really having that intersectional lens. The disability justice movement expands the ideology of the independent living movement, which came out of a white-dominated disability rights framework, to embrace intersectional identities and broader cultural values. It suggests complex identities and cultural resonance within the context of self-determination and multiple communities. Moreover, disability justice celebrates the complexities of whole disabled bodies, powerful because of who we are, not in spite of who we are. During the first couple years of my illness, I tried to reframe my sense of worth within the idea of being rather than doing. Disability justice embraces our sense of worth as inherent, not predicated on how productive we are, a concept that can run right up against the pace and values of activism in the LGBTQ movement, something I'd always experienced as a cultural disconnect. CFIDS is as maligned as queer and trans people, assumed frivolous and insubstantial, discarded, mocked, misunderstood. Like mixed people, like trans people, CFIDS is repeatedly instructed that it can't possibly be who it says it is. That this is the queering of CFIDS. And yet, thanks to Sins Invalid and the burgeoning movement of sick and disabled queers, I now have a transformative disability justice framework from which to own and find pride in my non-conforming, gender transgressive, disabled body. Thank you. All right, back to you, Allie.
And I am passing the baton to Reggie, who's going to introduce our next reader. Thanks so much, Willie. That was
all right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Willie. Our next reader is Chardonnay Thomas. I'm gonna read their bio. Chardonnay Thomas is a non-binary femme artist, educator, and spiritualist from Southern California. They are an organizer who helps run Rich Oak events. They love music, journaling, and honoring their spiritual lineage. They consider their work to be ancestral and use art to bridge the gap between Yoruba tradition and everyday life. In their free time, they enjoy studying the Ifa tradition, watching Netflix, and building their business, Healing Cool Waters. Their poetry is ethereal, as is their presence. Personal note, Chardonnay is somebody that I have admired their writing and their message and their spiritual connection for a very long time, and it is an honor to have them reading with us today. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass it to Chardonnay.
Oh, okay, can everyone hear me? Yes, we're good. Okay, awesome. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Reggie, especially for inviting me here and that extra little tidbit on my bio. I'm going to just go ahead and jump straight into the poetry. So a white person with dreads comes up to me and has me fucked up. Space to take up space. You write about brutality you don't experience as if you're your whiteness is erased by your queerness, as if your queerness could erase your privilege. It is not an accurate narrative if you leave out your place in the pyramid as the oppressor. You don't get to speak on my oppression from any angle but the aggressor. Your revolution is colonizing my tongue with a rainbow flag and using it to speak on whiteness without indicting yourself when all of y'all are guilty. My hair gets caught nappy, but your hair may as well be a Nazi logo that you can't see. Call it color blindness or the erasure of Black heritage or manifesting something interesting about yourself because y'all love to take Black culture while talking over Black people. If you were a real ally, you'd show up to protests looking like those clean-cut white folks who the police don't get caught on. You'd be on the front lines when they come with the gas and the rubber bullets and their tanks. You take the first hit so that my Black ass wouldn't have to for a change. Or at the very least, you'd offer to pay me to educate you instead of approaching me like you deserve my words, knowledge, or presence. I get paid to teach, and I don't do any labor for free. But that's just like y'all. You demand Black space, time, and existence, upholding systemic slavery while also denying you play a part just because you have matted hair you call dreads and write poetry on trauma you could never experience. Go fucking figure. Y'all always want to be a nigga until it comes time to be a nigga. Then you'd probably end up like your hair, damaged beyond recognition because you lack the strength and depth it requires to embody anything Black. That's one of my favorite pieces that I've written, specifically because as a member of the queer LGBT plus community, I felt like the boundaries of Black femme womanhood and queerness so frequently colonized. And I think that in order to have safe, healthy, inviting queer spaces, that has to be talked about, and accountability needs to be had. Okay, I'm just going to jump straight into this next poem. Why did nobody ask the female daddy longleg if being called daddy translates to an erasure of her womanhood? The same reason you don't realize the caucasity of asking me what my pronouns are. You're a queer, non-binary person lacking color as much as you lack respect for boundaries. Unless you're talking about the borders built by your ancestors with the same hands they used to cut the mouths out of the tongues of mine for generations. Their blood in my mouth runs over, a drop for every refusal to abide by this demon tongue. It does not contain a word divine enough to define me. Ancestral memory is so blurry, I can't tell you what language those before me preferred to speak. And now that it's damn near out of reach, you cautiously ask me what my preferences are. Bet I am the river Oshun, the manly woman, the water you must drink that will also drown you if you even think about disrespecting me. Now look at you, apologizing. You can keep your sorries, unless it's in the form of money, because knowing better has never been cause for y'all to do better. So why did nobody ask the female daddy longleg if being called daddy translates to an erasure of her womanhood? No one's bothered to learn her language. The word for father is also the word for mother. There is no translation. Twin flames dancing in fluidity, the holy one. It's not uncertainty that fuels my desire to strip the pronouns from my tongue. It's the certainty that they, like you, fucked up. The culture, their rituals, gender of unborn child, transforming destiny away, or abiku, translation borns to die. Translation dies before parents. Demon tongue failing me again. So I asked the female daddy longleg if being called daddy has any effect on her womanhood. She laughed, said men always think what they call us changes us, said we've always been more than woman or men, transcending beyond the umbrella of trans. It's more demon tongue. My blood spilling from my mouth as I say my pronouns are she or they. This piece kind of spilled out on me after I kind of had a conversation about my gender with a white non-binary person from, was actually a coworker. And I was just thinking about this conversation because in it, I was basically told that I couldn't both be non-binary and not identify as trans. Which I just ignored at the time. And then I started writing poetry again because I had a hiatus. And this kind of was just one of the first ones that was like, we need to address this whole gender thing, especially because even more than within the Black community, being gay is kind of looked down upon, but that's more so for men. And I haven't experienced so much of that. But when it came to understanding and expressing my gender, there was a moment where my mom was like, so she did this interview with me for a school thing. So what's your sexuality? And she asked that question. And then for the topic of gender, she's like, oh, well, I know you're a woman, and just kept going. And so, yeah, thank you for hearing me and allowing me to share space with everyone.
Thank you, Chardonnay. I just really want to say that, really appreciate your words. And I have to say we were actually thinking about more formally announcing people's pronouns as part of this event. And in reading your work in preparation for today, it really made me remember that that's not always necessary, even if we think that's what we're supposed to do in this time, and how white supremacy and English supremacy can really inform that choice. And so I really appreciate your work. And so I'm only saying my own pronoun, or if anyone has asked me to do that as a result. And I do just want to say before I introduce our next reader that we've had some trouble in the Facebook live stream. Apparently, sorry, Neve, my beloved honorary nephew who is interpreting for us. Unfortunately, folks, I understand, are not seeing the interpreter on Facebook. And we expect that when this event is posted in an archival manner on YouTube, you will be able to see the interpreter. However, right now, I think all you can see is the closed captioning if you click on the link that has been dropped into the Facebook chat. And if I'm incorrect about that, please someone from Foglifter take over and let folks know that. So Neve, keep going. And people will be able to see you when they see the YouTube event later when it's posted in the coming weeks on YouTube. So with that, proudly introduce our next reader. And that is another very exciting opportunity for me to introduce Andrew Raymer, who's the author of several books, including Queering the Text, Torah Told Different, Two Flutes Playing, and Fragments of the Brooklyn Talmud. For more information, you can visit his website at andrewraymer.com. And just personally, I want to say Andrew is someone I've also known for many years. We've been fortunate enough to be members of more than one synagogue together in the queer and radical and poetic place. He's been a mentor to me. He helped me study for my adult bar mitzvah, which I didn't get to have because of COVID. He's a treasure. I hope you go and read more of his work. And he's a beautiful soul. And I'm really happy to introduce you to Andrew and let you hear from him. So take it away.
Well, thank you so much. I am honored and delighted to be here in such wonderful company. This is my show and tell. This is the book. Cover art by an amazing San Francisco artist, and Marguerite Herbst. There are two words that I would like you to see. And two tiny little footnotes. If you don't know what the Talmud is, the Hebrew Bible is printed about this fat. The Talmud, which is ongoing commentary, is about 3 feet of books. And one of the characters' names is Rabbi Moshe Leah Beit Goldberg. And Moshe Leah's name, the first is traditionally male, the second is traditionally female. And Mabeit Goldberg means from the house of Goldberg, and this is a way of saying that this character in a binary language, Hebrew, is neither traditionally male nor female. End of footnotes. "80 years ago, in the final decade of the 21st century, a time of increasing social, economic, and environmental horrors, over 2,000 rabbis from each of the 7 streams of Judaism that had been practiced at that time gathered in the city of Brooklyn under the leadership of Rabbi Sarah Rosa Ibn Nuriel to create a new Talmud, one that would represent and teach, guide, and encourage, that would assemble their stories and legal decisions for Jews in the surviving communities around the world. Rabbi Sarah Rosa's father was a direct descendant of the 18th century Persian rabbi and translator Baba'i ibn Nuriel, while her mother was a descendant of his illustrious contemporary, the Eastern European founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov. Sarah Rosa ibn Nuriel was educated in a girls' yeshiva in Los Angeles, did her undergraduate studies at the Sorbonne, and her graduate work in anthropology in Tehran. Some years after returning to North America, joined and was ordained in the path of the newest of Jewish streams, the post-Orthodox movement founded in Brooklyn by Rabbi Moshe Leah Beit Goldberg. That path was called Edenic Judaism by a whose successor, Rabbi Carlos Sarfati, was Sarah Rosa's mentor, and who she eventually followed as the third leader of Edenic Judaism. In the time of horrors, following massive fires and the largest earthquake in California history, the evacuation of most of the Middle East due to a quarter of a century of drought and unlivable scorching heat, and a decade after the virulent Mott pandemic wiped out 1/6 of the Earth's population, it was Rabbi Sarah Rosa's background, plus her great scholarly and spiritual experience, that empowered her to approach leaders from all of the often hostile strands of Jewish practice to gather together in Brooklyn for 2 10-day gatherings a year to be held over the course of 5 years. The rabbis, cantors, magids, teachers, and scholars she welcomed to Brooklyn came from varied and divided Jewish communities that were still reeling from the nightmares of that period. With the end of the state of Israel, and with so many clergy, teachers, and leaders lost to Mott, we can only imagine the ways in which those shared nightmares helped to focus and gradually unite them. We know that all of the gatherings met in closed session, their proceedings and the materials they brought and crafted contained on a private linked non-wireless network as they moved toward codifying a final public document during the 10th and final gathering. The sessions were all held in the Eden Synagogue, which stood on a high point above the rising waters, for Brooklyn had become the vital center of world Jewry after the evacuation of the Middle East. In addition to the text we would expect in such a work, Rabbi Sarah Rosa put out a call for stories, poems, and letters, for essays and sermons, as well as art and audio and visual materials, with a dream of crafting a common, that's quote, language, unquote, a common language. That phrase coming from the title of a seminal book and poem written by the 20th century Jewish American lesbian poet, Adrienne Rich. We know too that there were representatives in attendance from many other faith traditions, including active and engaged Buddhist and Muslim caucuses. The Talmud Project was controversial, both for including such a range of Jewish, non-Jewish, and multi-faith Jewish voices, and coming as it did more than a millennia and a half after the codification of the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmuds. We also know that as the roots of the two ancient Talmuds emerged from centuries of trauma, that this new Talmud project was a response to the escalating threats to human survival, which have only grown more dire in the years since the 10 Talmud convocations were held. In an extant email sent by Rabbi Sarah Rosa to her former wife in Beijing after the Ninth Assembly, she mentions that a solid working draft of the project, more than 15,000 pages in 18 languages, had been compiled. We know too from that email that thousands of visual images, over 800 hours of video materials, and over 3,000 hours of audio materials had also been collected to be used in ways that we can only now imagine. For alas, as we all know, the 10th and final gathering of our revered sages had when New York City was destroyed in a nuclear attack. The survivors of Edenic Judaism eventually regrouped in the hills of Oakland, California, where a small, thriving synagogue and academy exists to this day. But it was assumed by them and others that everything the scholars and sages collected had been lost. But then, 2 years ago, a single laptop was discovered by an archaeological team working in the now submerged and still radioactive ruins of the Eden Synagogue in Brooklyn. The laptop had only been slightly damaged in the blast that destroyed the city, but it had been sitting underwater for more than a decade. So none of us expected there to be any remaining information on it. But in the hard drive of that battered laptop, our digitographers discovered a very small number of files that were intact. As you read through these pages, you will surely feel as we feel, both the great delight that anything has survived, all of it in English, the dominant spoken language of the convocations, along with a deep, aching sorrow that none of the rest of the text or any of the audio or visual materials were retrievable, save for only one verse of a single song titled Archelaus, which we have placed at the very end of the book. We pause now to honor those millions who perished in the blast and to remember its consequences for all of our people and for all of humanity. May there be for a blue. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm just coming back from some tears listening to you. I feel like, you know, we don't often hear enough how poets and writers are also prophets and can be connected to foretelling of futures and different worlds. And we got to listen to what poets and writers have to say. And I'm really glad we're all here today to do that.
Well, thank you. May I be a false prophet?
You know, hey, that'll be good. So I'm very honored to now have the opportunity to switch tracks and introduce my partner in this event, Reggie Edmunds, and say a little bit first formally from his bio, and then I'll say a little bit myself. So Reggie Edmunds is a poet, educator, cultural curator, and local college dropout based out of Richmond, California. They are a co-founder of Rich Oak Events, which produces 2 poetry events in the Bay Area, Alchemy Open Mic, and the Oakland Poetry Slam. They are the Foglifter Emerging Writer 2019 to 2020 Youth Fellow, a 2019 to 2020 Onye Ozi Fellow, and a 2020 Shuffle Collective Literary Arts Resident. Their poetry is a map of intersections that describes the world through the viewpoint of a queer, Black, often sad boy light, and can be found or is forthcoming in Rigorous Magazine, Foglifter Journal, Stentorian Bitch, and 2 self-published chapbooks, I'm Too Black for This, SHXT from 2017, and Sad Boy, 2018. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Reggie Edmunds, and his work is incredibly powerful. I thought so the first time I had the opportunity to read it, and hearing him read, I hope you feel connected to the deepness of the themes that he speaks about, and give him your full attention.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Perfect. Thank you, Allie. Thank you first to Foglifter for this amazing opportunity. It has definitely been a high point of the last, I don't even know how many months, a lot of months. So thank you so much to Louisa, to Jesse, to everyone at Foglifter, to Allie. Thank you for making the last few months some of the best months artistically. Without further ado, I'll get into some poems. The first one is called Redacted, and I won't really explain it, you'll see why. Definitions for redacted include the darkest color, the absence of all light, deeply stained with dirt, evil, and the opposite of white. So by definition, redacted people must be an unsavory group. If redacted is the opposite of white, then it must be the opposite of innocent. Redacted boy must be considered guilty until proven dead, until redacted boy becomes absent of all life, and still, white folks don't understand why the redacted don't advocate for all people. Don't understand that some people never have to worry about their humanity being ripped away. Redacted boy knows erasure very well, knows how to represent his redacted skin in a way that makes white people feel comfortable. Redacted boy knows that even white comfort can mean danger if he's not careful enough. Another redacted boy is shot dead by white officers, and redacted people carry a riot on redacted tongues until redacted freedom becomes something other than a redacted dream, the redacted hope of every redacted child buried by a redacted mother too soon. Redacted boy complains and is told to pull himself up by redacted bootstraps. Redacted boy tries to call himself anything but redacted, and his name is ripped from his throat, a redacted hallelujah, a redacted battle cry. And a dream deferred becomes a redacted future, which leads to a redacted rage, which fuels a redacted movement. And a redacted mother's cries don't fall on white ears, so it also becomes redacted grief, a redacted funeral, with a redacted preacher praying over a redacted body to an equally redacted God. We cover ourselves with redacted clothing. Look how exposed the redacted body becomes in the most vulnerable of moments. How we pour ourselves out a redacted river, and white America swims in our blood. A redacted boy knows this, so he softens himself, or tries to become the darkest night so at least all the other stars can shine a little brighter. Redacted boys hold galaxies between redacted palms. When they die, redacted boys supernova into redacted holes, devouring all the light. Redacted boy knows this, and he does everything he needs to do to survive, and still, he will die a redacted death. Redacted boy knows this, and keeps writing redacted stories, hopes that one day they will stop being considered redacted and just be considered good, like the redacted boy, so full of light despite being told he was empty of it. Redacted boy knows this and keeps living, keeps loving, keeps smiling with all his teeth, not redacted, but anchored bone, pearly white and shiny, the only thing about him considered innocent enough not to remove. So that was Redacted. It is a poem where I took every time that I wanted to say Black and used the editorial redacted and removed that from the text to create double meanings of both Black and removal, because often oftentimes we are, a Black narrative is not considered a good or acceptable narrative until the Blackness is removed. You'll see Black characters being played by white people on TV when they were described as Black in the book. Things like that. And trying to really emphasize that if you could replace Black with any word, this would not be acceptable. The way in which Black people are treated in this country would not be acceptable if you replaced Black people with any other people. And so the next few poems are from a manuscript I'm working on, really tackling faith and race and gender, and what it means for me to be a queer, non-binary Black person who living in the United States and growing up very hardcore Christian, and deconstructing that and kind of trying to create my own spirituality and religion. And so this first poem is called Where is the God in This? Behind the gun, holding the knife, fingers hooked into my throat, is God the air or its absence from the lungs? Is God the blood or its transit from the body? Once I thought I heard the Lord in the rumbling of my empty belly. Anything can be a prayer as long as it goes unanswered. My name, perhaps, could be a tiny plea for a country that isn't heavy with my blood. God must be a river red with iron. Perhaps all of their lead is a metal offering to a metal God. My body must be an altar of some sort. Every sacrifice bleeds salvation. Perhaps my blood is a prayer too. Perhaps this country is scraping at my skin to get to the God inside. Perhaps everything is meaningless. Martyrdom is a white man's fantasy. And when the blood leaves, it doesn't find any God to pray to. Okay. And so, yeah, that's that poem. The next is part of a series of poems I'm writing, where I'm taking old Negro spirituals from back in the days of slavery, and doing erasures of them in order to create different messages. So all of this is pulled from, this poem is pulled from the Negro spiritual Wade in the Water. God's trouble, dressed in white, God's a leader dressed in red, troubled the water that Moses led. God's over yonder, the water coming on me. God's trouble, water redeemed God. Follow me down to God, to water. And this next one is called Genesis 7:11. It is vaguely about gender, mostly men ain't shit. I was then a man called down a flood, and I wasn't. If violence is what makes a man or a god, then violence is what breaks me into the earth. What men take from me, I allow them to keep. My hands, my name, my tongue, my past, my present, my future. I want to fly above the ocean and become my own god, but violence is what silences everyone who exists between the sky and the rising waves. Everything a man floods, I arc back above the surface. Everything a man takes, I want back. I want my name heavy with salt and hands strong enough to bear the weight of my own sin. I want my voice, a good church song, and a preacher that won't try to drown me. Okay. And so the last one is a poem. It is a pantun, Negro spiritual called Night. So the first stanza is actually the text of part of the song. All night, all day, angels watching over me, my Lord. All night, all day, angels watching over me. Angels watching over me, my Lord, bless these dreams. Let these angels watching over me bring me to the promised land. Bless these dreams of every Black boy with a bright future. Bring them to the promised land. Remind them what it's like to be loved. Every Black boy with a bright future deserves to see the sunrise. Remind them what it's like to be loved in the arms of the ancestors. We deserve to see the sunrise all day, all night, all day, in the arms of the ancestors, all night, all day, all night, all day. Angels watching over me, my Lord, all night, all day. Angels watching over me. Thank you. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much to Ali, to Foglifter, to everyone who's participating tonight. It's been an honor to read with you all.
So, Reggie, thank you so much again. Your words are incredibly powerful. I can't wait to continue following you in all the ways that you're out there in the world as a writer, both publicly and as you become more published as well. And I just hope that the many people who are on this event now find ways to support you in your work. And yay for the Bay Area for bringing you to life. So the next person that I'm going to introduce is someone I feel incredibly honored to have the opportunity to introduce, is Jewel Gomez. And first read again her formal brief biography, and then say a few words myself. Jewel Gomez, who's Cape Verdean, Wampanoag, and Iowa, is a novelist, poet, and cultural worker. She's the author of 8 books, including the first Black lesbian vampire novel, The Gilda Stories, which has been in print more than 25 years. She's playwright in residence at New Conservatory Theater Center, which commissioned and produced her trilogy of plays. So I will just say that also I've had the great privilege of knowing Jewel for a number of years. I was a graduate student at San Francisco State, and she was on staff there for many years. I know some of the Foglifter folks know her as well, and she also has contributed to one of the earlier journals. And proud to exchange holiday cards with her every year, and to just be in community with her and her wife of many, many years. And if you've never read The Gilda Stories, it's time. I read it when it first came out, and talk about moving between worlds. That's what Jewel does, and you're going to get a taste right now. And so again, my great honor to be able to offer an introduction to Jewel Gomez. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's great that we've stayed in each other's lives all this time, Also, I wanted to thank the other writers. It was really a joy to get to hear you, and incredibly frustrating because I couldn't jump up and down. I used my little reactions button so that I could indicate I was or giving you a thumb. But this is the Zoom emotional response quotient is really not that high. So know that I was jumping up and down and waving the whole time you all were reading. Thank you so much. So I'm going to read two poems that were really monologues from the play I created based on the Gilda Stories. And it's really, I never have gotten over Gilda. The book is still in print, and City Lights did a new edition recently, and now I'm working on a follow-up, a sequel, I guess you would call it, to the Gilda Stories. So I'm always working on something to do with Gilda. These 2 poems I'm going to read were monologues in the play I did about Gilda that was commissioned by Urban Bushwind. The first is Gilda sings Desire. Love is a mystery, the clouded peaks of mountains. I had it for her, for others. But desire is even more savage, self-interest, elemental, opening, to take, to reveal enough to take. Lay here beside me, feel me steal across you when you sleep, suck your breath as they claim cats can do. Listen as I do this and be happy. I have finally come. It may be death, but it is also desire, a fuel, not a place. I push you back into the dirt, the soil of your ancestors, slip beside you like a farmer reaching for new potatoes, moist, solid prizes, small scarlet reminders of survival. Hold on to the rock at your head, to the grass at your side, but not to me. I am motion, living within the moments that have survived the past. It is not difficult being Black, being Negro, being colored, being woman, being nigger. It's difficult being and being and being, emptying out and refilling, reusable container, wanting. It is difficult to miss the dour certainty of the cotton rose and not offer blood as a substitute. Only this is assured. Desire lies in sweat, incoherent words never repeated before friends, and the loud song offered up. On your back, heels digging into the silken dirt, you forget you've ever had a mother or mailed a letter. You might not have come from my past or your own. The future may belong to us both. When my mouth is open to let ideas out and you in, that is desire. Unstable, gaseous, explosive. You give me your breath, I would take your blood and mine, whether it meant life or not. Without our knowledge or consent, desire remains a foundry, toiling hot, productive for only itself. Clanging, plunging, solid, then liquid, alchemy, unchained melody. Desire is the only now I own. So I wrote a lesbian feminist vampire novel, trying to create a world in which a person who comes from a place of totally no power, that is being an escaped slave woman, then gains power over life and death and learns about responsibility and what it means to have that power, and that having power means also having responsibility. And I tried to do that and still not make people fall asleep while they were reading. So it's a kind of a grand adventure. This second poem that I'm going to read, the final one I'm going to read, is, I thought it was appropriate because it's Gilda Singh's Longevity. And being the old part of the intergenerational, I wanted to read something that was connected with being old. So there's nothing old like an old vampire. So this is Gilda Singh's Longevity. I wanted to be with her more than I wanted sunshine, more than the sanctity of church and kin. But she was too much here. It was not my years, but hers. She was unable to come backward to the past with me. For this I hated her. Hate her still, even though she lives only in my memory. I lifted myself up from anger, from pies and doilies, from good church works. I lay open on a table, a kitchen table slab, begging to be looked upon, shaping that moment in my head. But she spoke only of time, especially the present, its preciousness, as if I were a teenager, unlikely to comprehend tomorrow. I own a wool cape, sewn late into the night. She grew fond of seeing me wear it. It is a dull, thick brown, but the clasp at the neck is finally done. The buttons hand-covered even the cloth cut by me. I have calluses on my fingers, this time from the bite of the scissor as I plowed through the bolts of wool to shape the fall of soft material around my hip. I cut too long under a lamp too dim, even for my eyes. Dark fabric drawing them to pain. It was not for the present I cut this cloth, but for the night she'd finally notice the buttons as she had them undone. When wet, the wool smells like the inside of my thighs, puckering my own mouth in hunger. I am not sacred. The folds of my flesh are eternal, but ordinary except when under a gaze, hers, my own. Her youth is piercing my skin, tearing through to the other side, exiting, leaving me alone. Motion swept her along to some other place. I remain behind. I envy her this leaving, this brief future she swallowed, loving me, deserting me to meet some new day. I could not attend. I always expected I might catch up, grow old enough to be with her. Instead, I am neither young nor old. Mine eyes have seen a glory. We were never meant to survive. I do not die. In her dewy face, I see cotton balls bloodied. I am a woman lying alone on a table with a cloak. Thank you. Thank you. Back to Reggie. Or not.
There we go. There, I was muted, but I think I got it correct now. Thank you so much, Jewel. That was beautiful. I'm currently just getting into the Gilda stories, so I'm really excited to see more of your work and more of your writing. The next person that I'm going to introduce is Daniel Garcia. Daniel is like by far one of the favorite writers I've ever met. Is to introduce Daniel, and I'll read Daniel's bio. Daniel Garcia's work appears or is forthcoming in Slice, Denver, Offing, Ninth Where, a semi-finalist for the Southampton Review Nonfiction Prize, formerly the Frank McCourt Memoir Prize. Daniel is also a recipient of the Muang Cha Sun Haiku Award, the first place personal essay award at the Mayborn Literary Nonfiction Conference, winner of the Bat City Review Short Prose Contest, and has a notable in the Best American Essays. Daniel tweets at Daniel Loves You. Yes, I am honored to introduce my friend, Daniel Garcia.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you so much, Reggie, for that introduction. Reggie is such a good friend of mine. I love their work so much, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm just going to jump into it right quick, just because you know, I'm so terribly nervous, but I love spending time here with y'all. Thank you so much, Foglifter, for having me. It's been a joy hearing everyone. So for this reading, I wanted to bring 3 poems that I currently have. I'm currently working on a collection of poems that are essentially, I'm wanting to explore the relationship that a body has between being a body and trauma, right? In plain English, I'm writing a whole collection of poems that explore this, you know, the ins and outs of an abusive relationship that I was in, and how I loved somebody who hurt me, right? And so real quick, just to jump in, this first poem is originally untitled, but I needed a moniker for it. So I've called it The Kiss. It's no secret. There wasn't a trunk of hastily packed suitcases, bedsheets thrown in the back seat, or a daring escape when he was at work. No quiet vanishing act buried in the mouth of night. I brought only my legs to his apartment. I left with only my shame tucked between them. No slickness to remember him by. If I had to find a diamond cased inside the neck of that night, it's that I have walked empty through the world in all of my days, with a heart swarming ache for love. And it was nice to feel that sting someplace else for once, or at least a different kind anyway. A man who, in a single night, scraped out the whole of me and proved the responsibility of this axe falls on my neck too. Because even though I've known the brackish hell of a man who showed up to the last night I was alive wearing only a smile, what I know of burning is my legs are what walked me into the flames. But unlike his fingers, the kiss held more than just seconds, and like the body, love was built to stretch. Because when my head was on his shoulder after, and my legs were braided around his like a promise, there wasn't a refusal I didn't have time to give, nor a sightless gutting from behind, just a man with arms that I laid between. I didn't leave that night alive. I only survived long enough for him to save me from it, long enough to build myself like a horizon, happy to be blistered by sunrise, like a gem passing just from the mouth into its first gleaming, like a boy staring up at the world, beaming. Thank you. So this next poem that I have is actually based on completely true events. I mean, all of my poems are based on true events, right? I always like to write from a place of personal experience, both being a poet and an essayist. But this next one is absolutely true. It did in fact happen. And it's called My Stepfather Taught Me to Pluck Chickens. A year after the divorce, my mother fell in love with a butcher. 7 springs later, when we moved across the street to a different trailer, we kept hens in the front yard. One day, one of the girls forgot about the rope around her leg. When he found her dangling in front of the makeshift gate, the rope didn't leave the incision in her neck. It just led her in front of the knife that did. It was easier than a vet. Her leg was pulled so far back, she could have been a ballerina. Apparently, if you do it, the incision I mean, right, it's humane. Halal, even. She didn't blink much. He sawed. I reached for her wings. Mostly, I was surprised. I didn't think her soft down could make such bitter popping. I'm sure I heard the lids falling clomp, its promise, like gravity, to hold everything I bagged up and put beneath it. The rest of her went inside the freezer. I'll never know what he did with her head. It sounds impossible, this, but at dinner, when the muffled crowing came from the freezer, I saw my mother's eyes grow like a wound, and I learned it takes time for a body to protest everything that was done to it. I learned there's horror in the kind of relief I found in the pinch of her eyes, the twist of her open mouth, to be grateful the blood on another's hands doesn't belong to you, that to her, a man holding a bottle is worse than a man holding a blade. How much mercy lies in waiting until a body's eyes can no longer bear witness to its desecration. My mother looked at me as if to ask where my fingers had been. I didn't think it was bad. She couldn't feel my fingers weaving through her feathers. I didn't think to call it anything other than a kindness. Thank you. So for this last poem, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the work of Brené Brown. She has a lot of very well-known popular work that analyzes the relationship between guilt and shame. And so I wanted to write a poem that explores that because I think, one, it's really important, I think, especially for trauma survivors, for survivors of, domestic and sexual violence, abuse, things like that. We carry so much shame and we carry so much guilt for the things that we've endured. And we carry those things like in our body, right? Because that was the point of trauma, right? So this is called Poem Where I Examine the Difference Brené Brown Denotes Between Guilt and Shame. How the former hints at a mistake, an action, and the latter, a belief sewn into thought, not unlike the flimsy shred of final protest from a tattered flag who once knew red, but always found white the most congruous with a story for how it ends. The sheet of canvas, once flag and now riddled with tears at the small center, who fell for the archer and learned stillness to be the first thing the arrows find worth piercing. That guilt is the inconvenience of permitting loose strands to unravel on the floor in shame. The certainty of who had done the unspooling and still begging, do it again, you son of a bitch, just to feel the arrows torn out. To have the archer's smoothing hands, reaching back to refasten the strands right after, the tender reminder of surrender's usefulness, this brief and bloodless good again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. About Daniel's work. But next, I have the honor of introducing the other Foglifter Emerging Writer Fellow, who has been my partner not only organizing this event, but in fellowship and community, Ali Michael Cannon. Foglifter Emerging Elder Fellow is a poet and dabbler in essays and short stories. His work appears in From Inside Out, Radical Gender Transformation, FTM and Beyond, Queer Jews and Secret Sisters, an educational equity consultant. He lives in Oakland with his wife and teenage son. So with that, I'd like to present our next reader, Ali Michael Cannon.
Thank you, Reggie, so much. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone, and I hope you enjoy what I have to offer. The first piece that I'm going to read is called Parched Earth, and I wrote it for a childhood friend of mine, Rami Strassman LaSalle. Cracks in parched earth achingly reach across memory and time. Water drips through a narrow straw, feathering edges, particles of dust joining together. Lunar landscape, that eye watching you from above, disturbing Monsanto relic. Childhood cast off, To say I reconnected with you on Facebook is some kind of 21st century cliche. No trans person waits for unrequited tenderness. Queer memory is fractured, is inverted, spinning through raking fibers of loss, deceit. Yet parched earth awaits water without end. Cracks can melt into mud, fingers soaked with wetness. To tell you I never looked back on my childhood would be true. It's just there. And I had to. Tomboys who become dykes, who become men, don't gather friends like water. The Earth Bowl is an offering, a desert landscape made whole. Each step we take marks the ground, ears cocked and waiting. The next piece I'm going to read is called More on the Narrow Place, and I wrote it for my pal Owen Fighter, my desert brother, who's hanging with his family in Southern California. And I hope it gives you some feeling of the narrow places we're all living in at this time. More on the narrow place. In that crevasse of rock, pushed through, Joshua trees, elegant divides, house of horrors, planet of dust, the ache you move through, your lover's filament touch. In rock walls, fallen boulders, echoing around your ears, not listening. The breath of your body carved out in channeled, impossible despair, all laid waste. The seer of flesh is not unknown, not Jesus or artificial intelligence, wrapped up in your wanderlust. Spaceships are crashing down, the earth still spinning on its axis, the bellowing desert, the search party, the one fell swoop. Here in this moment, the avalanche, the bristling hand, shrugging off the disappearing wind chimes of prickly pear cactus spines, the old Palo Verde drying in the entrance, holding up the door, the one tipping stone, the one you cannot hold alone, reaching for your teenager's strong grip, pulling you through, pushing us through, there on the other side, light and wild and dream and future now, softly falling here in the narrow place. This next piece I wrote in 2017, sometime in the beginning of what we can refer to as perhaps the awful administration. I don't like to say the person's name. In the shadow of bombs. In the shadow of bombs and scary presidents, in the agony of loss and defeat and wounded outcry, in the testimony of the oppressed, in the cry out of the wreckage, the fuselage of time, the painted bird screeching, the feather on the wing of desire, the placid wonder of the hopeless, the shattered memory, the lack of truth, the devastated wasteland, the harbors of despair. The wilted hourglass of time marches suddenly into an abyss of forever, into an aching spasm of, oh, beautiful for spacious skies, oh, amber waving, oh, oh, oh. All right, and this piece is called Run, and I wrote it in 2007, and I'll just say it was long before surgeries for trans folks were covered, at least in California, and they're still not covered in many ways. For many people, even if there's coverage in one state, it doesn't mean you can access it. So it's about that and about some other stuff. Run. If when the acid troweling junkie erupts in your throat, then you should know it's time to leave. Run far away into the dying mists of Avalon. Run with your tail between your legs if you have to. Down the road with Kerouac, or trying to tie your shoe behind your back while no one is listening. To your slide guitar, your modern banjo, your wump maker, tie down your ruts Tie down yourself to the tracks of infinity, that long train going nowhere, a distance greater than the sum of two sides squared. A triangle pared down in the black hole of nothingness. Run there where no one will find you, not the tranny chasers or the Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled penis peppers with the too big $100,000 bar dick. After you drag yourself out of the pickle barrel, then relish the taste of good old world Jewish loving. Feed your hunger on it like that guy in Crossing Delancey Street, where sexuality is ethnic and innocent and loyal. A wood barrel that never gets pushed or rolled down the street. All right, and the last piece I'm gonna read, I wrote this for Sydney Clifton, and it's called Grief Comes by Day and by Night. And today I'm also reading it for the over 97,000 people in the US alone that have died of COVID-19, and in naming of the incredible silence that there is in this country right now about all of their deaths. Grief comes by day and by night. In its robes and its trappings, it catches us unaware. The shadowy hand, the lingering unresilience. It finds us there, cold on the marble countertop, flashing in the plastic smile of feigned all rightness. Grief comes by day and by night, holding us close to its pillow, watching us breathe out our words into its hallowed echo chamber, its dry, broken down wagons. Grief follows us there. We try and lose it, try and run around the next corner, keeping a lookout too. To say we lost you is not ever true, for you were always found, present, alive. 3. Lost without you, without her smile, her unending gifts, even the ones we threw away. Those too are lying in a heap, the boxes yet to sift through, the ashes sitting in the well-organized garage. Grief comes by day and by night. 4. Our collective grief, that is never undone, not for time passing or history examined. No, some grief is a whole, the whole world passing through its lightning bolt, pressed to the other side of the galaxy, the black hole, the eternal space, where grief is riding its chariot, lingering on each and every note. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ali. It's been an honor to work with you over the past 10 months now. But yes, thank you so much for your words and your wisdom and your energy this entire time. And next, I will introduce our last reader, Tino VH Jr. Is a Mexican-American spoken word poet born and raised in Oakland, California. He attended UC Santa Cruz pursuing a degree in literature. At UCSC, he participated for the school's Cup C team between the years of 2014 and 2015 and coached the 2017 team. He was also a part of the legendary Santa Cruz in 2018, where they traveled to Southwest Shootout in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and won. His work exposes immigration and migration, indigeneity, the hood, queerness, feminism, and decolonial frameworks. He currently curates 3 shows in the East Bay, Rich Oak's Alchemy Open Mic and the Oakland Slam, and the Berkeley Slam. In his spare time, he constantly updates his best East Oakland tacos list, plays too many video games, and writes pre-colonial high fantasy. It is an honor to introduce this poet, whom I love very dearly, Tino VH Jr.
Good afternoon, everybody. An essential worker, salute. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's staying healthy. And I'm just gonna, I'm just getting into it. But thank you all so much for having me. Internet, hello, happy Saturday. So None of these, so y'all might not catch some of these words. Some of them are in Spanish, some of them are in a indigenous like language. Tough, that's language for you. Learning it is a doozy. But this is my first poem, and it's about, if anyone is familiar with the Cholula hot sauce, this is actually about the city before the hot sauce came, and before Mexico was a thing. The city actually predates like the establishment of like the nation of Mexico and everything. And so my family's actually from this area, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit. Ode to Cholula. They say there are no weapons allowed in the city, and that was enough reason to massacre. I think no one imagined that something would be left standing or made of. Instead, names of something foreign. Everyone has a name for it. It doesn't fit in their molars. Was set aflame here. What hair was unbraided? What sun witnesses the unhappening of its people? The flint arrows chime in and say they were not fired. But blood was always labeled savage, made an animal of. Thus, Inquisition must be inevitable. Something must be spilled to make a way for the new. Not everything sacred is consecrated. Everything damned haunts the language that commits the genocide. There are so many fields for the dead, all of them unhonored grave sites. Every temple turned to a mound, every mound surmounted by a church, every church an arrival of the future no one consented to. How you're taught not to speak lightly of blood, how reminiscence become the chain link to ancestry, how I learned to speak of the dead in past tense, or how skin is weaponized against me, how I'm more than knife they twisted, see myself at the end of violence with unclenched fists and braided hair, even in claiming my beauty. There is blood of mine I've been wade through, just end at the foothill of a church, just to climb over bodies, fall to my knees and swear. Yeah, that was that poem. I love my city. I love my parents' city. That's exactly where I'm from, but I love my heritage. It's been a really difficult process because like for me, indigeneity has been a really weird thing around. Like I know my family like is the indigenous population of there, but I also have to. What's what I'm looking for? I'm in consistent battle with like the whole framework of like also having been born here in America, being first generation, and like the privilege that comes with being an American citizen, and that's more than I can say for other people here, especially a lot of like white folks who just have roots here and everything, and think this is like their family, their entire legacy built on blood and bodies, and and that isn't theirs, which is really funny, to me at least. But yeah, like one of the things that also is really funny is like how like we, in the pursuit of stealing land, stealing culture, and like decimating people, one of the things that also often happens is the stories and everything. And I think especially with how we get royalties and how like people make money based off of writing stories or whatever, there's often this whole thing of this question of like sincerity and whether that the story that you write is actually yours. So yeah, so forgive my French, but this poem was about a bitch who couldn't stay in her own fucking lane. También de este lado hay sueños. On this side too there are dreams. Janine Cummings. And so I should be grateful she put a brown face on the mask of an unnamed immigrant. And so I should be able to see my parents in her book. Call American Dirt a true immigrant story told by a white woman. A voice for the voiceless. Here is our white woman savior. Here is her writing, galloping in to save brown people, to upend the violence, conquer the bad hombres. Here I ask for a cut for her royalties to support my family, and she calls me ungrateful. 7-figure book deals and 69,000 kids in cages later, she's still comfortable. Uses her American visa to unfurl the wall for herself. When I say she's profiting from a story that does not belong to her, she calls Latinos a product of the cartel, a border, another El Dorado satiated with a proper pillage. I call her white noise, and she proceeds to make an abundance of static. She begins to sob and say how sorry she is. She has vowed to profit. Humanize my parents. Janine hides behind her tears, the way all white women do. I tell her white women are synonymous with invasion to me, and she cries more. All white women do is embellish a narrative and cry when they're called liars. Says to work, but her still buying it, are quick to protect her and heckle me. I tell her I'm uncomfortable how quick she makes herself the victim, like I haven't tried to cast my family as resilient, since I haven't write them off as hopeless, and yes, I'm bitter. How all our stories survive because of us, handed down from generations just for her to call it anthropology. How she says La Frontera, but her voice is the wall of document, and people have to crawl over how she can quote everything, and people will believe it fell from her mouth first. También de este lado hay sueños. On this side too, Armando Alanis, get it right, Janine. None of this work is, these aren't stories you can bleed dry, but you try anyway. Feminism is so American, it's new wave imperialism. You're so well-meaning, I empty my exchange for my trauma. She must think of mercy. She must think we're incapable of escaping of our own violence. She must think she's doing it for no one is voiceless, Janine. But you aren't interested in making yourself a platform for us. Fuck your book. Here I am, ready to write you out of existence. Here is all the money you made a profit of, given back to the people. Here, I will up and begins with you, Janine. Expose you for what you really are. White noise performing my own face. White woman still colonizer. White woman still violent. And that is all I have for all of you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure being here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tino. So yeah, that was the last reader. So I think now we have our panel, our Q&A. So let me pull up these questions first.
Hey, Reggie, before you do
Yes.
that, can I just say one thing about the one writer that wasn't able to join us before you
Yes.
go into the panel? Awesome. So our last reader was supposed to be the elder Aurora Levins Morales. She lives in Puerto Rico, and unfortunately, there was a storm there today, and she has very bad Wi-Fi connection. What I want to do is just read her bio, and she did send us an audio recording of her work that she was going to read this evening. However, we couldn't manage the technology to post it to the live stream, but we're hoping to be able to include it, either edit it into this video somehow or as a separate link that would be posted alongside the YouTube video once it's available. So just really want to send some love to her. And Tino, also thank you so much for your powerful words as guides to so many different ways we can understand oppression and the way particularly Indigenous folks are marginalized. And I believe that Aurora's work also speaks to many of the same themes you just touched on. So you're paired here virtually. So Aurora Levins Morales is a Puerto Rican Ashkenazi writer and liberationist. After more than 40 years in the Bay Area, she recently returned to her birthplace in rural Puerto Rico. Her most recent books are Medicine Stories, Essays for Radicals, and Silt, Prose Poems. Her work is community funded on Patreon. And I'll just say that I'm currently reading Silt. It's such a moving work, and again speaks to so many themes that we're living in these days, and really brings the earth and devastation throughout the work, as do many of her liberationist pieces. And I will say also that I was very moved as a young lesbian feminist by her earlier work written in the early 90s called Getting Home Alive, that she co-wrote with her mother. And she was going to read a piece from a even more recent work that she also co-wrote with her mother before her mother died. So anyway, I really hope that the technology works and you get to hear from Aurora, who unfortunately couldn't join us this evening. So Reggie, back to you.
Yes, definitely special shout out to Aurora, and we miss you here. We wish we could have heard your words in person, but thank you for sending us that audio. We'll hopefully to get that up. Nice. So I have our questions that we're going to ask. And I guess our first question for our panel is, how you feel about the way that it has changed, the way that we discuss the L+ community?
I was just going to jump and say here, if you want to use the raise hand feature on Zoom, because all the writers were on Zoom, you can, or you can just start speaking to respond to a question. But Reggie and I are going to trade off facilitating. So just a technical moment, if that helps anyone.
I think I saw Jewel.
I just unmuted myself. Having listened to the language of liberation evolve over the past, I'd say, 50 years, and loving language on its own, certainly as a writer, I think we, as a people who want social change, need to be prepared for change in our language. When feminism, in the second wave of feminism, we spend so much time trying to get some of the words changed in the culture because they were so denigrating to women. And I remember when I was in grad school in journalism trying to explain to one of my professors who insisted that I write out Mrs. John Smith. And I'd say, well, no, there's a Mrs. Mary Smith, perhaps, but there is no Mrs. John Smith. And we tussled like crazy over that because it was just like a woman disappears under a man in that naming. And so since that time, which was in the 70s, each time I meet different kinds of language changes, it has been, you kind of get startled and then you have to figure out, how is this going to serve our social change and our liberation? And even if I find it difficult or uncomfortable, if it's going to social change, how can I stretch myself to fit it? It's things like there, calling a single person a they. I could feel my English teacher rolling over in her grave. And but for me, it's a chance to say, twirl on, my girl, but we are going to figure out a way to open up the world, and language is one of the first ways you do that.
I'm glad you said that. I think there was a study that came out about some our relation to perception and language, where they did a study specifically on color, and they looked at languages that the more language you have to describe a certain color, the more you can discern different shades of that color. So they have one language that has 5 words for the color of blue, and they can only perceive 5 shades of blue because they have no language for any of the other shades. And then there's one with 17 words for shades of blue, and they can see all 17. And so I think it's similar with the way that we describe our community, is that especially when we start getting into words that describe specific people and start labeling specific experiences, we get to study and understand them more. We as humans don't really understand anything we can't describe verbally. That's one of the biggest powers that we have as humans, is being able to. So thank you for sharing how important it is that language changes and evolves. Maybe not change, but evolves. Because I think the language has always been, especially the language that we create, has always been for us, but it's naturally had to grow as our community has grown. Anybody else have any input? Willie Wilkinson.
I'll go, yeah. Well, for me, as someone who's been trained people for 3 decades on LGBTQ trans issues specifically, community health providers, educators, business professionals, and social justice folks. I think, you know, people have a hard time a lot of times really fathoming the complex terms, identities, and concepts related to LGBTQ experience. And I think it's a beautiful thing that the language has evolved so much over time, because it has evolved as we've been able to describe more complex identities. As you're talking about shades of color, for instance, and just being able to describe the vast diversity in the LGBTQ community and the different ways that people identify. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because people are naming identity, and with that comes a movement or movements within these communities. And that's how we're creating change, by, by describing our experience and articulating it and making space for that experience and helping people understand those experiences. But I think what's interesting about language is that when we talk about the past, it's not like talking about trans people in the past. So like, you talk about a trans person in the past, you talk about them in the way that they identify now, but referring to their past. But when we talk about the LGBTQ experience in the 80s, and we use the word queer, which was not a term we used in the 80s, I feel like sometimes that can be a little misleading, because, you know, the terms that were used in the 80s were lesbian, gay, with some room for bisexual experience, although there was a lot of discrimination, and, you know, there wasn't a lot of room for trans experience. When I think, you know, we talk about the past and we talk about queer people, like it was expansive and welcome in the way that queer is welcoming. And so I think that's an important piece to think about. I mean, we could certainly use the word queer to talk about the past, but I think it's also, it can be misleading and inaccurate to say language that we use now to describe the past, even though of course people might come out and identify as queer later. So I think it's really interesting, you know, when we think about the different concepts, like for instance, the term non-binary, well, that's a term that has gained a lot of traction in the last 5-6 years or something, and that's a beautiful thing, the burgeoning movement around non-binary experience. And in the past we used terms like third gender and gender, and there are lots of ways that people describe complex gender identities. It's interesting to see that that love that movement is happening, and that space has really been created term, and that we have, you know, states that are legally designated that identity, and that there's a growing movement in which people have to really understand this language and identity, because there's a legal designation now for that gender identity, and people really need to get with it who might not have ever wanted to contemplate these ideas. So I think it's interesting, you know, when we talk about these experiences as we understand them now, and then what might we frame that in other contexts, like in the past. How do we describe that? Because I mean, I'm somebody who identified as third gender for many years, and I suppose and my identity has shifted now to male. But in the past, I could say I was non-binary before we called it that. And so it's interesting just kind of to look at how we place language on different periods of time when we did not have that language.
And then Andrew Raymer.
Multiple feelings. On one hand, I love that language evolves, and I love that. On the brink of climate disaster, what I'm afraid is the narrowing of categories of who we are will siloize and isolate us at a time where we should all be coming together. And ultimately, and this may be a cranky old man, it's in the title of one of my books, I don't like the word queer, because I feel like by using a word that says other and different, that unconsciously I'm always giving power to what we don't even know words for, them, the other, the mainstream. So I'm hoping that younger people, in the way that in my life homosexual was replaced by gay, is replaced by queer, I'm hoping that younger people will invent a wonderful umbrella word that means us.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. It's funny, I was having a conversation about navigating the reclamation of slurs earlier today. with my brother, and we were talking about how oftentimes the reclamation of slurs has to happen after the trauma, and it always happens in a generation that didn't directly experience that trauma, and how we as younger people in our communities need to be mindful about how people who experienced queer as a slur might be triggered by how we describe ourselves and others. So I personally don't say queer community. I personally describe myself as queer, because I know that that is a word that I can attribute to myself without offending myself. But I think one of the things about navigating slurs and navigating twisted histories with words is understanding that your identity isn't necessarily somebody else's identity. And especially when we're navigating like age ranges and like different generations, it's important to understand the generational history and the generational trauma that comes with certain words. Like, for example, like gay was a slur for me. It became where gay was the wrong thing to say. So like when people call me gay, I almost like recoil, because one, I've never identified homosexual, but also because the only time I've ever really heard gay up until college was like in a very negative context. And the positive word that I heard being thrown around by people in the community was queer. So it's interesting to see how it's almost like the exact opposite of your experience. And yet down the road, it changed. And all of a sudden, you know, I'm in your position where the new word for our community is something that I personally am like, that carries a lot for me. Yeah, it's just one of those situations where it's hard to navigate language, especially as it changes over time. It's hard to navigate it and like have a consistent word for our community when the language changes so frequently and for so many different reasons. But I think we should move on to our next question for the sake of time. Ali.
Yeah, that was a great discussion. And just so folks know, on the live feed, we prepared some questions in advance, Reggie and I, in preparing for this event to co-facilitate. And we are going to try to leave a little time for, Reggie's going to try to pull some comments or questions from the Facebook chat, if that's, assuming that's technologically successful. And then I'm just going to ask if Foglifter folks who are facilitating in the background, just let us know if we can go a little bit over 7 o'clock versus a hard stop at 7, because that will affect how much we let folks, you know, respond to certain questions or how many questions we can complete. So
I'll interrupt you real quick. I do think we need a hard stop at 7, just in terms of paying for
sure.
the captioner and respecting everyone's time.
Great. So just really quickly, then the second question we wanted to ask was just how how you learned about the other generation, example, and that younger and older folks to respond to. I mean, for example, for myself, you know, when I was lesbian identified in my 20-year-old years, I really was exposed a lot to lesbian feminists, maybe 10, 20 years older than myself, not only through like my life as a women's studies major when I was a student, also at UCSC, but for me, it was really about feeling part of a movement. And a lot of that was like hearing people read out loud their work like we're doing today. So that for me was about like, it wasn't just stuff I was reading in books, whether that was recently published work or older stuff, but it was about like being in spaces, not just on college campuses, but in communities where I felt like I was part of something that was happening. And so for me, that's how I learned about the generation, which Jewel, I see like some of your contemporaries as part of who I learned from, and how I felt part of something. And so, and then now, I mean, I'll say for myself in terms of a younger generation, I've been blessed to work in schools. So I feel like a lot of my to LGBT younger folks in high school been through connected to, you know, straight alliances or gender sexuality alliance groups, and just having through an educational space access to LGBT young folks who are, you know, under 18. And that's a lot of how I've learned about like what they're thinking about and sort of how they are identifying. So I don't know if anyone else wants to respond to that question briefly.
What was the question?
Oh, sure. Just like how you've learned about the other generation. And it could be like, you know, looking at, in this case, our fellowship was 18 to 24-year-olds, and then folks over 50 were elders. So, but, you know, it could be how you think of yourself as having learned about other generations, even generations who may no longer be on the planet. So just, you know, how have you gotten exposed to learning about other generations? Like what makes you aware of other generations, or how have you learned about one another?
I guess I can go. I can answer this, or at least I'd like to.
Yeah,
I think I even I said it in my poem, where it's like we survive because of the stories that are handed down to us. I very much do think that, you know, as like, you know, for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, a lot of like how we perceive ourselves are direct, like, you know, inner indicators of culture and who we are as people are because, like, you know, we learn about the stories of our grandma, or like, you know, our great grandma, or like we have some sort of connection to like something that we're constantly reminded to, like, you know, honor and everything. And I think for me specifically, it's why I'm so compelled to be a writer or to be a storyteller, because in many ways what I'm doing and what I'm trying to figure out is how to keep those stories and those legacies alive for myself, because these are, like, you know, like things that have been shared with me, like, yeah, maybe as gossip, like every now and then, yeah, it may be more like a serious, like, sit down and like a conversation, like with my parents or with like my grandma. Like, you know, I have in another poem, I have fond memories of like me sitting down and like learning, not my with now it being like in like one of the like predominant indigenous languages of Mexico, but like, you know, like just like the consistent of like trying to make an effort to, like, you know, keep what is yours or what is handed to you, despite like living in a homogenous like American society, is, I don't know, I think super resilient, for lack of better words. But it's also necessary work, because like I think so much of like being here in America and like having to, like, you know, lose so much of yourself, like in terms of language and culture and arts and all that, is necessary, because we can't all be the same voice, like, you know, saying the same thing. We can't, like, we don't all share the same experiences, and we all don't like have the same traumas, or even generational traumas that we have to overcome. Kind of where I'm at. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. But
no, that's great. I think I just I'm sure other people have things they could respond, but I want to, we have one last question. We just kind of want to end it since we only have till 7, and you know, hopefully we can keep this conversation going in other ways, but I want to turn it over to Reggie, who's going to ask our final question. I think we unfortunately don't have time to respond to the feed, just because in the interest of time. So
Yes. Our last question is, what are the things about the community now that you hope are still here in the next generation? So kind of looking towards the future of what are some things we would like to still see. I can answer first, I think. What I want to see is just continue to see how open and unapologetic this community can be about being ourselves. I think that's one of the most important forms of resistance for LGBTQ plus communities, is being our authentic selves. That's what we're fighting for, is to be our authentic selves. So the fact that we have a community that has not been given the space to be ourselves, but regularly just takes the space and says, you know, forget what the country thinks. We're going to have gay pride marches every year, regardless of whether or not we have rights. Regardless, we're going to celebrate ourselves. We're going to celebrate the authenticity of our community and what it means to identify with our community and our struggles and celebration. So I want to see the continuing celebration of ourselves within the community. Because I think that's really important. There's always, especially within like social justice realms, it's always so easy to focus on everything that needs changing and everything that's bad and everything that we're fighting against. But it's also important to celebrate who we're fighting for and what we're fighting for. So events like Pride, still having queer clubs, still having gay clubs, lesbian clubs, we can come and have community and celebration outside of all of the other things that are going on. So I hope we can continue to do that. Would anybody else like to answer?
I'd like to answer. One of the things that really make me excited to be a part of this community is how open we are for growth and accountability through understanding why someone else might be upset about things, or like earlier, everyone's be announced from people who have different relationships, and just the fact that the majority of the community is really opening about the fact that we different relationships to the word queer or pronouns, or even the idea of gender, or all of those things. Yeah.
I would love to see, and I imagine it happening, our community being solid in ourselves, but also able to reach out and connect with other movements, because I feel like that's the only way we're going to get any kind of progressive change, so that we're not just a single monolithic thing. We have all kinds of parts ourselves, so that we can see ourselves working for feminism, working against anti-Semitism, working against poverty, nationalism. I think we've really got to, as a movement, take our place among the other national movements that are about social change. Labor unions are going to be key in the coming months as workers keep getting laid off, all kinds of workers. What is our role with that? So that's what I'm hoping, that we're strong enough as a community to do.
That is a beautiful answer. Yeah, I'm looking at the time and it's 7:01, so I think is the end of our panel. I personally, once again, I can't say this enough, like to thank each and every one of you for being here. I'd like to thank Foglifter, Ali, Jesse, Nebe, Terry, every single person who made this event possible. It's been an honor curating this event with Foglifter, with Ali, and being a fellow here. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks to everyone.
Yes. Thank you all.
All right.
All right, here we go.
It's really beautiful.
Bye.
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 Bye.